Yeah. Blackjack. Life is like a game of cards. It's not what you dealt, but how you play it. Yeah. Blackjack. To play each situation correctly. I remember they used to laugh at a brother.
Welcome back, guys. Welcome back. It's your boy DELRAY, Richardson, platinum artist, platinum songwriter, Straight Game TV. Thank you for tuning in. I appreciate your time. Do me a favor, hit the thumbs up button as it pushes the content out to more subscribers and potential subscribers, if you will. Also, if you haven't subscribed to the channel yourself, it's greatly appreciated. Tell a friend. And most importantly, if you want to be one of the first people notified when I drop some of this straight game, please do me a favor and hit the bell notification button right below this video. I'm going to get right into it. Ladies and gentlemen, I've been asked the question, and so many people have come up with this theory, right? Everybody's asked me based on the conversation that I believe David Kenner had with Frank Alexander, believing that David Kenner somehow had something to do with the death of Tupac Shakur. And I've been asked this question. And the answer to the question is not really easy, but it is. But let me take you through the reasons so that you understand where I'm coming from. Nothing but facts. What you got to understand, David Kenner is a lawyer, right? And lawyers don't do any more work than they have to do when they're trying to help out a client, be it criminal defense, be it a civil litigation, be it a family attorney or whatever it is, right? And so David Kenner specialized in criminal defense, right? And so as we know that, he was Harry O's lawyer. And that's how Suge got introduced to David Kenner, right? And that's how eventually Tupac got introduced to David Kenner, was through Suge, right? So now you got to understand how that works. As I told you before, the reason why people think that is because of the phone conversation that happened between Frank Alexander and David Kenner.
Mr. Kenner, I wanted to call and talk to you because I'm really upset about, how this whole thing and everything is going, and I seem to be in the middle of everything. And I could have called Reggie to talk to Reggie, but I'd rather call you being an attorney and let you hear where I'm coming from and my standpoint and everything. Because the other thing, too, if I were to speak to Reggie, he may come back to you in a different way.
Hold on, can you let me change phones and go to my office?
Sure.
One store to Euclid Street and the 5 freeway. Hello?
Okay, there, now I can hear you.
Okay.
I want to say this, Mr. Kenner. First of all, in Las Vegas, and I'm hearing things, so I just want to clarify with you, which report is that they're looking that you have? Because he told me, he said...
the one that I think that came up is actually, I think, a Compton Police Department report.
Mr. Kenner, I have never spoken to Compton Police Department. Never. I've never been inside of a Compton Police Department.
All right, well, let me take a look and see what it is, and Paul can tell you when he calls you back, and then we'll get together tomorrow, definitely. I'd love to do that.
Okay,
But I'm here to tell you that there must be a motive, right? And so before you can say something about somebody doing something, first you need to find the motive. And what I want to ask you guys is, what was the motive for David Kenner to have something to do with Tupac's death? 95% of the people who say or claimed or made some kind of erroneous accusation as to David Kenner being involved with the death of Tupac Shakur can't give you a motive, right? But what I'm about to do is I'm going to show you why he didn't, why David Kenner didn't have nothing to do with Tupac's murder. And in fact, Tupac being alive would have been more beneficial to David Kenner than Tupac being dead. First and foremost, before anything ever got happened in regards to David Kenner representing Tupac with that letter that he signed before he got out of prison, was this letter right here. And this letter right here, like I said, it was a letter basically giving David Kenner permission to look at Tupac's royalties and all of the stuff. And then the reason why he did that was based on the fact that when he was about to do this situation, involve himself in a situation with Tupac and trying to get Tupac out of prison, he needed to know, number one, how he would be compensated. Number two, all of the ins and outs and what Tupac's royalties look like. So when they did this bail agreement, they could attach Tupac's income to be able to recoup the money that they would put up for the bail. But this happened early on, if you will, right? So that's position number one, right? And so position number two, if you remember, Suge Knight said that David Kenner was getting paid $100,000 a month.
And they was giving David $100,000 a month, and David said he was giving Jimmy a kickback from $100,000 a month. So we was paying him for all the work he did as an attorney, and they was giving him $100,000 a month.
Wow.
And buying cars and houses and stuff.
For just being the attorney for Death Row. This is minus anything that he would possibly do to represent Tupac, having Tupac as a client, right? For what would appear to be his musical situation based on him preparing the bail agreement, as well as anything contractual that he would need to be negotiated by a lawyer who was then at that particular time, based on this letter, David Kenner was Tupac's lawyer, right? So David Kenner was being paid $100,000 a month. And this is 1995, 96, 97, right? $100,000 a month. That's $1.2 million a year. You know what I mean? So when you that's reason number one that he wouldn't want to have anything happen to Tupac. I understand that most people say, well, Tupac fired David Kenner when he fired Reggie the Rat Wright Jr. When he fired him. Two different, that's apples and oranges. David Kenner wasn't going to involve himself in something frivolous like that. Like I said, you can see how he handled his business, and when everything went to the wayside, he was one of the last Mohicans standing. And like I said, he was squeaky clean. You know what I mean? You couldn't say he did anything in regards to that. I would say the only thing that David Kenner didn't do that he was supposed to do, according to that agreement that they signed, that handwritten agreement, was to prepare Tupac a contract with Death Row Records. That was the thing that David Kenner was supposed to do that he didn't do. And the reason why David Kenner didn't do that was because the bail agreement did not require that he do that. Remember, Suge also said that while David Kenner was getting $100,000 a month, Jimmy Iovine was getting a kickback of $100,000 a month. You understand what I'm saying? And Suge also said that David Kenner, on top of that, was buying mansions, apartments, and cars, and all of this other stuff, right? And the proof of this is the lawsuit in which Afeni Shakur had filed against David Kenner and Suge Knight and Death Row after Tupac's death. So that's a fact, right? So now, all of these perks, right, and being paid $100,000 a month, just for being the attorney for Death Row, minus being the attorney for Tupac, and what he would then in turn bill Interscope or Death Row, basically, but billing Interscope, right, for the work that he had did for Tupac, like preparing that bail agreement, representing them on any other, court cases or anything like that he would need representation for, right? This is the reason that that David Kenner didn't have anything to do with Tupac passing away. What's the motive? There is no motive. There's nothing that he stand to benefit from Tupac being dead. right? He had a client in Tupac Shakur that a lawyer would dream of. And why I say that is because Tupac was constantly in trouble. He was very volatile. He was very emotional in his reaction to a lot of things, right? And rightfully so in some situations, and rightfully not so in other situations, right? But Tupac was a lawyer's dream client because he stayed in trouble. So therefore, he even said it, taxes got me crossed, lawyers, they're trying to sue me and X, Y, and Z, you know what I mean? And giving lawyers money to lawyers for his defense and so on and so forth. He talked about those things, right? But like I said, when you deal with the fact of the matter, there was no motive. There was no motive. There was nothing but upside for David Kenner in representing Tupac and being a lawyer for Death Row and all of the other things that he did. So much so that, nobody can explain to me, but I understand why it happened, how Jimmy Iovine was getting $100,000 a month kickback from the accounting firm involving Death Row, right? The same accounting firm that was actually paying David Kenner. You understand what I'm saying? And so when you deal with that fact, that's the reason why you gotta understand. Most people say, I believe, it's one thing to believe it, but you gotta have a motive. There has to be a motive for why he would want Tupac dead, and there is none. There's nothing but upside. Nothing but upside. And so for everybody, like I said, for the young man who asked me that question, and the question also contained, do you think that David Kenner, Suge Knight, and Reggie, the Rat Wright Jr., had something to do with, setting up Tupac? And the answer is no. The Tupac situation was an isolated incident. And so, but the thing that you have to understand about that, it was the negligence and not having the right security and all of those things that could have prevented a lot of stuff that happened in Vegas that night. Like I said, David Kenner was not Reggie Wright. David Kenner had no reason to be mad. His gravy train wasn't going to get cut off when Tupac fired him. When Tupac wanted nothing else to do with David Kenner, and he sent that letter to David Kenner the same day he sent the letter to Reggie the Rat Wright Jr., David Kenner was still going to get $100,000 a month, because that was for him representing and being the attorney and what I come to understand as like a silent partner in the Death Row new paperwork that they had signed. And that's what Harry O was talking about, that they created another Death Row, right? And so from that perspective, there was no upside, like I said, for David Kenner to be involved with the death of Tupac Shakur. So most people who come and they tell you that, it's just gossip. It's just folklore. And it's like, okay, let me say this. The conversation between David Kenner and Frank Alexander was more based on the fact that they wanted Frank to lie in regards to Suge not being prosecuted and going back to prison, from that perspective. I understand all of that, right? And David Kenner was Suge's attorney, and rightfully so. And they had threw out some things talking about Frank Alexander had talked to, the Compton police or something like that, and so on and so forth. And Frank Alexander basically denied all of that, in which I do believe him in that case. The crazy part is that what they didn't know, or at that particular time, is that Kevin Hackey was actually working undercover for the FBI. But they were worried more about Frank Alexander than they were worried about anybody else. That's the most ironic thing to me when you think about this whole situation in totality. So to the brother that asked me that question, I just wanted to elaborate on that. Nah. Like I said, once again, the paperwork showing that the money that David Kenner was spending, getting, the mansion out in Malibu, all of these things were perks. So there's no way that he would want Tupac Shakur, the number one selling artist on the label at that time, dead, because that in turn would stop him somewhat from doing what he was doing And, you know, basically what they did at the end of the day, they basically tied those expenses to Tupac Shakur after Afeni sued him in the lawsuit. They basically said all of this stuff was going to be billed to Tupac, you know, and here's the paperwork to prove that fact. So I think that was the thing more than anything that David Kenner was responsible for not preparing that contract for Tupac like he was supposed to as his attorney. But when you come to know about the bail agreement, you can understand why he didn't have to prepare that contract, because Tupac was still signed with Interscope, and David Kenner knew that fact. You understand what I'm saying? And certain things that's not really for public consumption, but it's a good thing that we got a chance to see that actual bail agreement to understand what the totality of the situation was. So to answer that question, no, David Kenner didn't have nothing to do with that. That would be beneath him. You know what I mean? You don't have to involve yourself with stuff like that. You know, that would be in their world, that would be tantamount to nigga shit. You know what I mean? They don't. Why? No. So your boy DELRAY, straight game.